All right. So, Jonathan, thank you for speaking with us. Congratulations on becoming a FIBA agent. I wanted to know,
Thank you.
the first question that I wanted to know is about your background and your professional experience before giving this exam and becoming a FIBA agent.
So I have been working in sports events operations for the past 7 years in India, 2008. I was initially with a company called Global Sports, and then I moved to a company called CA Quan. Uh, with both these companies, I was essentially involved with managing sports event operations. Uh, and during both my stints in both companies, the large account was the NBA account in India. So I have been privileged to be part of every NBA event from 2008 to 2013. And then in 2014, I was given the opportunity to move into a similar operation, probably a slightly larger operation role with Mumbai City FC in the ISL. So I took that opportunity, so now currently, as we speak, I manage stadium operations with the Mumbai City FC.
Okay. So, as a FIBA agent, I mean, this is your background. Obviously, you had a great experience in sport related event management, as well as you've seen a lot of talent firsthand. Now, you decided to become a FIBA agent. So, what does it mean to be a FIBA agent? I mean, what are you certified to do? What powers and responsibilities do you have?
Any professional contract that is signed world over in the world of basketball has to have an agent attached to it. In the only league that has a bit of a leeway with this is the NBA, but that's because the NBA or the American basketball scenario has its own set of laws of becoming an agent, which are obviously vetted by FIBA, but they have their own laws. So FIBA agent, for example, cannot sign or cannot be part of an NBA contract because he has to be an NBA agent separately for that. But outside that, essentially any professional contract that is signed between a player and a club has to have a FIBA agent attached to it. The reason being, FIBA agents like myself are trained to make sure the contract is airtight, protects the interests of both the player and the club, and makes sure that the contract is not in violation of any FIBA general statutes, laws, rules, or regulations. So, simply put, a FIBA agent helps the club and player understand that their contract is not in violation of any of FIBA's rules, laws, or regulations. At its base, a FIBA agent normally signs players, so he normally works from the point of view of players, but FIBA agents also can work from the point of view of clubs as well. Largely, though, the default setting is where a FIBA agent signs players and then helps them seek professional contracts with professional clubs.
All right. So it looks like as a FIBA agent, you need to have a couple of skill sets. One is, of course, the basketball knowledge and your scouting ability, the ability to spot talent, and also a bit on the legal side of contract vetting and drafting. Yeah. So, in given that, I mean, what is the preparation that you had to go through to write this exam, and what do they test you on in this exam? What is the knowledge that you require?
So the process is fairly simple. FIBA makes it fairly simple. They've got their general statutes, which are divided into 4 different books. The third book is what they essentially test you on, and the third book essentially deals with rules, regulations, and laws regarding player transfer, player nationality, and FIBA agent duties scope, and basically laws and sanctions regarding any of these 3 aspects. on the FIBA website as well. You need to essentially by heart book 3, and it's about, I think, it is more a pamphlet, and it's about, I think, 40, 50 pages long or something like that. And you have to by heart that entire thing. The examination the test is essentially 2-pronged. You have to go through an objective style exam, which is about 45 minutes. So they ask you 25 questions and you need to get 18 right. And the other part is where they interview you personally to kind of see whether you have some understanding of the game, which then obviously helps them make sure that they've got the right candidate in place. The examination process is not too hard, to be honest. There are a few formalities that you need to fill, which FIBA then obviously guides you through. Formalities like because this has got a very legal angle to it, you also need to be in good standing in your own country/city. So you need to get what is called essentially a police clearance, which needs to be no more than, I think, 6 weeks old. I can't quite remember that detail. So it can't be no more than the next number of weeks old. And a bunch of other forms that you need to fill out, which FIBA, the lady at FIBA named Francine, I don't know whether I'm pronouncing her second name right, Wallen-Bider, she guides you through the process extremely clearly. So there is no ambiguity in the process. And this is all available, obviously, on the FIBA website. That's where I got all my information from and the basis eventually.
Right. So that's pretty informative. But I also read, you said there was an article which carried your picture on the new set of FIBA agents, and I was reading in that article that there are a lot of your, the people who wrote the test with you and who became agents. A lot of them have some sort of background in either they've played or they've coached or some sort of association with the game. My question is. How prominent is that? Is that the majority of the people who become the agents, or is it people like who how we see in other sports? A lot of businessmen or people professionals who are associated with the sport. They also want to become an agent and represent players. So what is the demographic that you've seen?
So what's key in becoming an agent is relationships in the basketball world, right? I actually met one of the agents who wrote the exam, one of the people who wrote the exam with me, who obviously became an agent with me, was a journalist in the Turkish sports scene. And obviously his work afforded him the opportunity to build relationships in the basketball fraternity. And before he became an agent itself, he started helping players and clubs connect. So clubs would call him saying, oh, do you know this player? And the players would call him saying, do you know this club? So he would help make that connection. But effectively, he couldn't charge commission off it. And he couldn't really be part of the contract. So over a period of time, he realized that this is something that he's doing anyway, which he did for a couple of years. He might as well make it more official and actually even earn some money off it. So what's key there to answer your question effectively is that you need to have relationships. So whether those relationships come from, obviously, like if you're a player in the league in Europe, or you're a coach in Europe, you obviously build those relationships over a period of time. So one of the gentlemen who wrote the exam was a player who played in Spain for 16 years with the same club. I can't quite remember his name right now, but
Right.
I can send it to you later. But so obviously, if he stays for that long, he has X number of relationships, and that gives him an advantage over anybody else. That being said, you don't necessarily need to be only a player or a coach, but you definitely need to have the relationships in the industry. So, if you look at my case for that matter, I'm neither a player, nor am I a coach, nor am I a sports journalist. But I've worked in the events industry and very closely with the basketball fraternity in India to confidently say that I have a fair amount of relationships within the Indian basketball fraternity to take advantage of being a FIBA agent, which is essentially helping Indian players get professional contracts, either when the professional when league starts in India or with European teams abroad.
All right, all right. Now that sort of leads to my next question about how you plan to build your client base. Now, you said that I mean you have close connections with the Indian basketball fraternity, and I'm also aware that you have an idea of who are the good players and who have a potential to play in a league abroad. But what markets are you targeting? As in, what leagues would you do you think that Indian players would have a chance to play in?
So from my initial research, so I should be honest and say that in the my aim for the next 6 to 8 months is to build relationships in the European markets. I also, after finishing the exam, as a matter of fact, I traveled to Barcelona to meet with the director at EuroLeague. So I met the chief operations officer and I met director Lucas Kafati, who's director of, I think he's director of, director of business development, yes. And that's his job, Mr. Lucas Kafati. And I met a gentleman by the name of Edward Scott, who is basically chief operations officer for the EuroLeague. The reason I met them was I wanted to kind of start with one step ahead. So I wanted to start building those relationships in the European markets for Indian players to play. Because from what I understand, and I get this from fairly strong resources, and not only just from my resources, but from my experience as well, having watched and played basketball over 15 years, is that Indian players right now born in India cannot make the cut internationally. Cannot make the cut to the NBA. Possibly the NBDL, but again, that's just currently way too competitive because everybody, no matter where he comes from, whichever part of the world he comes from, whether it is China, Australia, Russia, Japan, Thailand, India, wherever it is, if you're a basketball player and you're serious about it, you want to play for the NBA. So that pool is just massive currently trying to get into the NBA right now. So for me, it did make sense trying to pitch Indian players to crack the NBA. What would be more realistic is for an Indian player to crack the European market. And even in the European market, very established high-level basketball like Spain or Italy may not be on the cards. But we're looking at smaller leagues like ideally Division 2, Division 3 leagues, even in Spain for that matter. Division 2, Division 3 leagues are constantly looking for, international players. So, honestly speaking, I can't tell you specifically which markets I'm going to be targeting. I'm just going to go for the entire European market. But I'm going to ideally target Division 2, Division 3 coaches because that's where I believe Indian talent can thrive. I can obviously go after Division 1 clubs, but I don't want an Indian player to travel to a Division 1 club and for whatsoever reason sit on the bench. That does not help my cause, not that it helps the cause of the player, and not that it helps the cause primarily of what I want to develop Indian basketball. I don't want an Indian player to go, it will be great, it will be a great story if an Indian player gets signed by FC Barcelona's basketball team, which is the top team currently in Europe. But if he's a 12th man or he's bench warming, that makes no sense for me. My key is to get Indian players playing time on European teams, and if that means putting them in Division 3 and Division 2 teams, then so be it. So over the next 6 months, I'm going to be working very closely with European teams, developing relationships to understand where it is that I can place Indian players that will get an opportunity to play and get on the on-court.
Right. Now you've spoken about Europe. What about other Asian countries, say China or Japan? Do you think there are opportunities there for Indian players as well?
Yes, there are opportunities there. The problem with a lot of these Asian leagues is that they are very focused on homegrown talent. I'm not saying the European leagues aren't. They are just as focused on homegrown talent, but they are more flexible to receiving international players.
Right.
Whereas for example, let's just take for example a market that's very interesting, which is the Philippines, right?
Yeah.
Now, Indian players can definitely crack the Philippine league. The problem though is that are very, very community oriented, right? That's one. Secondly, basketball is their national sport. Point number three, they are ridiculously passionate about the game. So for them, it makes sense to have more Filipino players, even the team owners in the Filipino Basketball League. It makes more sense to have Filipino players because then they can tap into the market that already exists in Philippines. So the moment they sign a Filipino player, and because as a country and as a people they're so passionate about the game, the moment they sign one Filipino player, his entire family, his entourage, his friends, his social circles become part of your team automatically, right?
Right.
So their interest in signing an Indian player will be comparatively less as to say a European Division 2 or Division 3 signing an Indian player. Again, it's almost a similar situation with China. China has a huge focus on homegrown talent. They also sign stars, but the thing with all these Asian leagues is they would rather invest money in, and when they invest in an international star, for example, they'd rather invest in an international star who is either American or European and is already an established player than take an Indian player and see him come up. They are not. For them, that's not the focus. For them, the focus is filling the seats. If they find an Indian talent who can fill their seats, I'm sure they will pick them up. But currently, I don't see that happening realistically over the next 3 to 5 years.
Right, I understand. So, right now you're saying your focus is on the European market, and probably the second or third division leagues in.
Ideally, the Division 2, Division 3, but if I find a Division 1 team where, for me, it's going to be very simple, Vishnu. When I sign the contract with the team, I want in some way to get guaranteed that this kid, whoever they're signing, is going to get playing time. And when I say playing time, I mean if he's not starting five, that time I'm willing to accept it's sixth man or seventh man. Anything less than that, and I don't see the need or the necessity for an Indian player to sign unless the monies are so great. So I'll give you a quick instance or a quick point, slightly off tangent. So the Turkish league is one of the richest paying leagues, European leagues in the world, with regards to basketball, right?
Right.
So even if you're a 8th or a 12th man there, you make a significant amount of money. If that is the driving force for the player, and obviously I need to have the player's interest at heart, right? Because this idea of developing basketball is my dream. But my dream may not be synonymous with the dream of the Indian player. For him, he just wants to play professional basketball. He may not get the same amount of time, but at the same time, he needs to take care of his family monetarily and financially. So I'm not saying that I won't do those kind of contracts, but the money, either the playing time needs to be great, or the money needs to be something we cannot turn down. And again, money being the secondary one, but either one of these, if the contract doesn't suffice or basically tick off either one of these two boxes, then I don't see the point in signing that contract.
Okay, fine, understood. So just going back to the leagues, in your opinion, outside the NBA, which are the best leagues, basketball leagues in terms of pure quality of basketball, in your opinion?
So quality of basketball, obviously the Spanish league is insanely competitive, extremely talented. You have the German league, you have the Italian league. Obviously these are the usual suspects. But what I found out over the course of my research is even the Turkish league is quite competitive. Simply because the Turkish teams pay their players really, really well. They pay them quite handsomely. So what then happens is they attract talent who want to make more money as well. So the Turkish league over a period of time, because the teams pay extremely well, has gotten competitive quite a bit. But all the large European countries, so like I said, Spain, Germany, Italy, France, they all have extremely competitive leagues as well. If you had to put your finger on one of them to be the most competitive, I would say Spain, because very few but even Russia is up there, as a matter of fact. So the Russia, the Czech, these Eastern Bloc countries, they have extremely competitive leagues as well. The reason Spain kind of tops all of them is they are just as competitive, if not more competitive. B, they pay extremely well. C, the lifestyle is really good in Spain, right? But the standard of living is far higher. And it's more cosmopolitan than, say, a Czechoslovakia or a Russian or Eastern Bloc country, or say, for example, Germany. It's a little more upscale, it's a little more international, it's a little more metropolitan. So
right.
Spain, obviously, Spain tops it because it crosses off a lot of boxes.
Now, okay, so we've spoken about the leagues. Coming to the players, the Indian players, have you narrowed down on a list, or are there any 2 or 3 players that you think really have a chance to make it? Once you build your contacts and the timing is right, are there any particular players that you're looking at to push abroad?
So I'll be honest and I'll say yes, I have a list of about 18-20 players that I have shortlisted, but for me to take any names on the record right now would be a little too premature. Simply because a lot of these players, and not just the players, right? Even me as an agent, I'm still understanding how the landscape is going to work, because this is uncharted territory. Nobody has ever explored this in India. So
yes.
I'm not in a position, I'm not comfortable taking names of players that I'm interested in, because I don't want to be in a position where then if they catch them, because you guys are really popular, right, Eklavyas,
yeah.
And you have followed extremely faithfully across a lot of multiple social media platforms. If I put out a name, then player catches hold of it, and then he obviously sets a certain expectation, and if I can't meet that expectation, then I don't want to burn a bridge there.
No, I completely understand.
As you know, in India, relationships are key. But that being said, there are about 80. I have a list of about 18 to 20 players. What I can tell you is that these players, I'm not going to be going for players who are ideally 25, 26 and above. I'm looking at key players who are 25, 26 and below, because they have a period that they have the potential right now. They're hitting their peak slowly. Ideally, I would like to avoid taking players who are past their peak, because it's going to be that much harder for me to get them a pro playing contract. It's sport at the end of the day. If I go to a team with a 20-year-old or a 21-year-old with promise, as opposed to a 26-year-old who's established, they would rather work with a 20, 21-year-old who they can then groom if they have to groom.
Sure. That's I think the best way to look at it. And so I'm assuming that you must be starting from a really young age. Even players who are teenagers right now, you would be interested in because they have the potential to develop.
No. So okay. So let me restructure my answer. For signing contracts, essentially, because how it works in India is, and also FIBA wise, the player needs to be 18 and above to sign the contract, right? So that's when he can sign his own contract.
Okay.
So effectively, I'm looking at kids between the ages of 18 to 25, 26. That being said, one of the angles I'm obviously going to be open to is having these kids probably sign NCAA contracts, right? Or not NCAA contracts, but getting into NCAA schools. Now the issue there is, if a kid who is applying to an NCAA school has an agent, then he or she automatically becomes ineligible to play Division I NCAA basketball.
Right, I know that. Yeah.
And certain Division II schools also follow that. Division III, no problem. A few Division II schools, no problem. But Division I, it's a strict no-no. It's an automatic ineligibility. And Division II, there are a few schools, few programs that also follow that pattern. So, if it's a player who I know before I sign the contract is interested in pursuing an NCAA Division I or Division II college, then I want to make sure that I don't do anything to jeopardize that. Which means that I may have a verbal agreement with him that, okay, I'm going to help you out in whatever way I can, guide you and assist you in possibly getting that admission. But once you do, essentially, there's not going to be any contract. I'm just going to be doing this as somebody as a like to be able to pitch to be your agent. At the end of the day, once you go to college NCAA, you have various, like hundreds of agents come to you, right? And want to represent you, especially because I'm focusing on Indian kids. Everybody wants to get the next, whatever, Satnam Singh or Singh Bular or whatever, whatever you want to name it. So I would, just because of me helping you, I'd like to be able to at least pitch to be your agent when you turn pro. Right? So and that's for kids who are interested in taking NCAA contract. If you're not interested in NCAA and you want to kind of work on your game and then eventually go straight into a pro playing contract in Europe or even in the US, for example, then I can sign a contract with you when you're 18, because then I can have that contract with you as an adult. And simply because if in case, God forbid, the contract comes up for dispute, the two people dealing in the contract are both adults in the Indian courts of law. And so the 18 to 25, 26 is what I'm looking at. That being said, there are a couple of young kids. For example, I can tell you this: a couple of the kids who are on my list of 18 are of 18 players, 18 or 20 players, are 16, 17 years old. So they are not 18 yet. But I'd like to get involved with them from advisory perspective right now, so that when they do turn 18 and or when they do decide to turn pro, I can probably sign them to an agent's contract and then help them sign those pro contracts down the line. I hope that answers your question.
Talking about how FIBA agents earn their revenue. Once you sign a contract with a player, now I'm assuming the process would be like you have your contacts in these various leagues, and say a league is looking for somebody and you're aware of that. You are in touch with them, you're in communication with them, and then you probably send across, hey, check out this kid. You send across some footage, and if they're interested, they'll be like yes, and they would sign them to say a player contract, and they get a particular X amount of salary, right? Now, from what I understand is that FIBA agents get a cut out of this. Am I correct?
Yes, the FIBA agent can earn a maximum of 10% in commission on a professional contract.
I also went through the FIBA membership rules, and I understand that there is a yearly membership fee that all the agents need to pay to FIBA, and I think this is around 1,000 Swiss francs, right?
Right.
Now, do you think that you'll be able to sustain your business enough to that this yearly membership fee will not be a problem? Do you think that there will be enough number of players?
I definitely think that. I don't see 1,000 Swiss francs being a problem, to be honest. Simply because essentially a FIBA agent can earn 10% of commission on a professional contract, right? That being said, because of my previous experience in India with sports event operations, with Global Sport and CA Quan, I also know that there are other commercial opportunities that a player can take advantage of. Whether it is appearances at events, whether it is endorsements for that matter. Maybe not high billers like the way cricketers and footballers get, but smaller endorsements. So the key is to figure out what my minimum viable amount should be, right? And effectively, I need to cover up my cost of the FIBA fee, which is about currently Swiss francs is trading at about 68. So you can say about 70,000 rupees a year, and probably a few administrative expenses. So I would say probably about $1.5 lakh a year. What I'm saying is these are just bare expenses, because there are also times when FIBA may call you for a refresher course, which may happen year on year or it may happen once in 2 years. That entirely depends on when FIBA restructures itself, restructures the statutes that govern FIBA agents.
Right.
So there are some basic expenses. I would say if there is no conference that year, then 60 to 1 lakh is what I'm looking at. But if there is a conference, maybe $1 lakh to $1.5 lakh is what I'm looking at. And I don't genuinely think it's a big amount of money. It also helps that, like I mentioned to you, I'm currently working on a consultancy basis with Mumbai City FC. So I have X amount of money of consultancy fees coming in, so I can cover up that expense. Maybe the first year I won't be able to make anything, but over the years, while building relationships, the math I think will eventually work out. I don't see that being a problem. If you want me to throw, to kind of give it to you in figures and give it some perspective, I was talking to a bunch of agents who, are already on the scene, and they're saying players can earn up to about 5,000-6,000 euros a month. So, 5,000 euros is about 3 lakhs a month. And if you're talking about a 4-month season, that's 20,000 euros, which is about 12 lakhs or 13 lakhs a year. Automatically, if I'm making 10% of that, that's 1.2 lakhs. And then, my basic is covered.
Okay. That's good news. That's really good news, because if the math works out, and if there is a steady flow in the future years of players who would be going and playing abroad, then I'm sure that business will be really good.
Yeah, and also if you think of it from just a very simple math perspective, you don't have to break down the contract with it. If you just consider the fact that it's 70,000 rupees, that's barely 5,500 rupees a month. And I've been fortunate to have been working working from a very young age. So obviously, simply put, I'm Indian and I have an X amount of savings. So it's a question of, even if it takes me 2 years to do it, I know this thing is going to eventually pay off down the line. So the idea is to invest in myself. If worst case scenario, invest in myself over 1.5 lakhs over 2 years, and then reap the benefits down the line.
Right. Okay. That's great. So, now talking about a little bit, one of my final questions is about the incentives for the players. Now, obviously, if they get into a Division 1 European league, and there's nothing like it, the money will be great, the lifestyle will be great. But say they initially get into a Division 3 league in a European country, or let's say European country, then are the incentives there good enough for them to leave their current job? Say an Amrit Man who works for ONGC. He gets X amount of rupees a month and he doesn't have to go to work, and that's the way he takes care of his family, etc. Maybe a small amount, like say 40,000-50,000 rupees, but that is gradually increasing, and he just plays basketball all year round. Now he will have to forego that, I understand, to play in a division. Say if he gets through a Division 3 league.
So to answer your question in one word, not one word possible, but not all leagues are equal. There are a few players who are making an absolute pittance in Europe. I'm talking about salaries like $500 or $600 a month for 6 months a year, which it is nothing, right? Especially if you're living in a European country. My policy is very simple. If it doesn't make both financial and playing time sense, then I'm not signing the contract. Like I mentioned earlier in my earlier answer, it needs to make sense on at least one or two counts. And that's a decision I leave up to the player. Now, I agree when you say, for example, like you took the example of Amrit Khan. Maybe if he goes to a European team, the money isn't great, but he's getting more playing time. I will also leave that decision up to him. At the end of the day, these are grown individuals I'm dealing with. And while my job is to help them, my job is also to allow them to make their own decisions and assist them in any way possible. So if an Amritpal, for instance, decides that, or not Amritpal, but any Indian player that I sign, any of my clients, decides that they're fine with sacrificing a little bit of the money for an experience to play in Europe and X amount of playing time, then I will leave that decision up to them. It will be my duty to tell them what is in their best interest, based on my experience of dealing with clubs. But at the end of the day, the decision is theirs. My job as a FIBA agent is to facilitate this rather than to dictate. I'm more a facilitator than a dictator. regards to their career.
Sure.
Also, to add to that, this is something that with my research I found out that 90% of the international players have the basics added into their contracts. And when I mean basics means you definitely have a place to stay added into it, and ideally it's a flat that is paid for by the team outside of the salary you make.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then depending on the level of the player or the kind of commercial arrangement teams have with their partners, the player can also get a car. So if, say, for example, the player is damn good, the team wants to kind of retain him, they throw in a car, for example, as an incentive. Obviously, to and fro the game, there is a team bus, so that's taken care of. At some times, certain teams have tie-ups with car companies who signed on as their sponsors. So the car companies then provide these players cars at a very fractional cost. So for example, you can get up to anywhere between 40 to 60% off on the car just because they are partners. So then obviously that's an incentive that players can take advantage of. But a flat to the player himself, it is guaranteed or a must on the contracts, especially for an international player because he's not local. And that flag is obviously in his name for about 6 months, however long the season is. Then for the player to extend it, that's entirely up to him if he wants to continue there or if he wants to move on to another place.
Sure.
So anyway, to come back to kind of answering your question a little more specifically, no, the incentives are always not too great. So if somebody who is in IOB who's making 40,000-50,000, which is about $800 a month, and he's making it, and these guys make that money throughout the year, right? It's a 12-month employment contract almost.
Yes.
I'm not going to ask him to shift for $1,000 a month for 6 months. When he's making $800 a month for 12 months, that's about $10,000 a year. I won't ask him to shift for $6,000 a year. I'm sure he will work out the right. But if he's a young player and he wants the exposure and he believes that someday he can make that 6,000 into 100,000, 150,000 by playing in Europe and getting that exposure and possibly being recruited, getting better and possibly being recruited by a better team, then that's a decision he has to take at the end of the day.
Sure. That's very informative. Now, one of my final question is regarding. Apart from the contract, you would also one thing is you represent them to give them opportunities to play in various leagues, right? Now you also mentioned about appearances and endorsements. Do FIBA agents earn a cut out of that as well?
So that is not something that is going to be part of the FIBA contract, right? Essentially, I'm going to be signing on 2 contracts with each player. One is, and again, just because I sign them on as a FIBA agent, okay, let's put it this way. I will play 2 roles. My ideal situation is I'll play 2 roles with a basketball player. I'll play the role of a FIBA agent with him, which is where I help him, guide him, and facilitate professional playing contracts. And the second is I'm going to be his, what we call commercial manager, where I help him exploit commercial opportunities, whether it's through endorsement, through appearances, through, motivational talks, whatever it is that he can possibly get. They're going to be 2 separate contracts and they're going to be separate, they're going to be individual of each other. Just because I sign you as an agent, I'm not going to force anybody to sign a commercial agreement with me as well.
Okay, all right.
So that's how it's going to work. So it's going to be 2 separate agreements, and because FIBA doesn't have any ruling on this because it's none of their business. They make it very clear. It's not our business what kind of commercial value you bring to and facilitate for the player. For us, all that matters is the professional playing contracts.
Right. So that's it. That's it. I mean, I got the answers to all my questions.